I'm not wearing the uniform anymore. My hands still tremble when I tape a bandage, but that's just muscle memory from the years I spent patching men together in places where nobody should ever have to die. Most nights I work the late shift at the VA hospital in Norfolk. It's quiet there, the kind of quiet that echoes. You start to hear your own thoughts like distant artillery rolling in from a war that never really ends. Tonight I came to the bar down the street for water. Not whiskey, not gin. Just water. The air smells like spilled beer and cologne and stories no one should tell. A group of young Navy guys sit at the counter, laughing too loud. I know that laugh. It's the sound of boys pretending they aren't afraid. One of them turns to me. He calls me sweetheart and asks what a nurse like me is doing alone. The word lands soft, but it burns. He doesn't know that once upon a time I could stop a man's bleeding in the dark with one hand and fire back with the other. I don't answer. I just keep wiping the counter, one circle after another like polishing old ghosts. Then it happens. A bottle tips over. Beer spills across the bar. He reaches for my wrist just to tease and instinct takes over. My hand moves before I think. A twist, a breath, his knees buckle. Silence falls like dust after an explosion. In that split second, every laugh, every camera, every ego in the room freezes. I let go first, always let go first. I tell him I don't want trouble, I just wanted water, but something in me shifts, that old pulse waking up again. He touched the wrong thing tonight, not my arm, not my pride. He touched the memories I've spent years trying to bury. Someone asks for my name. I almost say Rebecca, the safe name, the one that pays taxes and wears scrubs. Instead, the words rise on their own. Steady and sharp, widow 6, and the whole place goes still like the sea before a storm. You can almost hear the question hanging in the air, who is she? If you believe that ordinary people can carry extraordinary stories, stay with me. Like and subscribe to Military Revenge, because what you're about to hear isn't a legend from the battlefield. It's a confession from someone who came home in body but never in spirit. Tonight, under the neon lights and the sound of fading laughter, I remember who I was. Widow 6, the nurse who never came home. When the bar finally went quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. It was the only sound brave enough to fill the space between my heartbeat and their shock. The young SEAL face was red, his ego bleeding more than his pride. His friends just stared, unsure whether to laugh, to help him up, or to film some more. The phone in his hand blinked with the red light of a live stream still running. Hundreds of strangers were probably watching this right now. Watching a middle-aged nurse put a Navy SEAL on his knees with one simple twist of her wrist. I didn't mean to embarrass him. God knows I've seen enough humiliation to last me a lifetime. But there are reflexes that never die even when the war ends. The body remembers what the heart wants to forget. He got up slow, rubbing his arm like I'd shot him. His friend with the tattooed forearm leaned over, smirking, and said, "Guess we got a feisty one here." The others laughed again, the awkward kind of laughter that comes when no one knows who's in charge anymore. I picked up my glass, empty but steady in my hand, and said, "I told you, I only wanted water." That should have been the end of it. But pride is a dangerous drug, especially in young men trained to conquer everything in their path. Rodriguez, that was the name stitched on his uniform jacket, stepped closer. He smelled like whiskey and adrenaline. "You think you're tough, lady?" He asked. "You think you can just humiliate a SEAL and walk away?" I smiled, tired and small. "I've walked away from worse." He didn't like that. His jaw clenched, his hand tightening again. I could see the moment before it happened, the same way I used to see an ambush forming in the desert, a muscle twitch, a glance to his friends, a sharp breath. The world slows down when you've been in enough firefights. You start to live between the seconds. He reached. I stepped aside. His hand missed and hit the counter. Before he could reset, I caught his wrist again and guided him down, gentle but firm, until his knee hit the floor. His eyes widened. His breath caught. Then came the sound that ended the laughter once and for all, the small, clean crack of a joint surrendering to pressure. I let go. He didn't get back up right away. Behind us, someone whispered, "Jesus Christ, what was that?" Another voice, uncertain and low, said, "That's CQD. Close quarters defense. Who even knows that stuff?" The question hung there, a thread waiting for me to cut it. I didn't answer. My body was trembling now, not from fear, but from the surge that always followed action, that electric return of everything you try to bury. It's been 10 years, and still my body remembers how to survive. A glass dropped somewhere in the back. The bartender, a kid barely 20, peeked out, wide-eyed, unsure if he should call the cops or ask for an autograph. One of the SEAL, older, maybe early 40s, wearing a beard too neat for real combat, stepped forward. He had calm in his eyes, not a challenge. His voice was steady when he said, "Where did you learn that, ma'am?" The others shifted, watching him. I met his eyes. He was reading me like a man who'd seen ghosts before. I told him the truth. Widow 6. For a moment, the words meant nothing. Just syllables in a room that smelled of beer and pride. Then I saw it, the flicker in his gaze. Recognition, disbelief, memory. He whispered, almost to himself, "That's not possible. Widow 6 was disbanded a decade ago." I didn't correct him. I just picked up the wet cloth again and began to clean the counter. It's funny how habits protect us. Keep your hands busy and maybe your heart will stay quiet. Behind me, Rodriguez muttered something about calling base command to report me. His friend told him to drop it. They weren't sure anymore who the joke was on. The older SEAL, Hayes, I would later learn, kept staring. There was a look on his face that didn't belong in a bar. It belonged in a hospital tent under red light and smoke. The look of a man trying to remember a life he thought he'd imagined. He said, low and almost reverent, "Widow 6 saved my unit in Kandahar. We were pinned in the valley. Someone came through the smoke, pulling wounded out one by one." The radio said the medic's name was Reaper, but later they said there was no record, that the team didn't exist. His words pulled the years out from under me. For a second, the bar dissolved, and I was back there, the air hot and metallic, the ground shaking, blood and dust mixed together until you couldn't tell where the body ended and the earth began. I wanted to tell him not to ask. Some ghosts are kinder left unnamed. But he stepped closer, slow, deliberate, and said, "You were there, weren't you?" I nodded once, that was all. He drew in a breath like a man surfacing after too long underwater. "Jesus, they said you died. In a way, I did." The bartender finally found his voice. "Everything okay here?" Hayes answered for me, "Yes, son, everything's fine." They all backed off after that. The tension broke, not cleanly, but enough for the night to keep moving. The jukebox started again, a song from the 90s about second chances. Fitting, I thought. I stayed a while longer, letting the noise wash over me. Hayes didn't leave. He sat 2 stools down, silent, every now and then. He looked at me like he was still trying to place the memory. I didn't help him. I finished my water, left a few bills on the counter, and headed out into the humid Virginia night. The air smelled of salt and exhaust. My reflection followed me in the dark windows of parked cars, a nurse in scrubs, a woman with tired eyes carrying a past she never asked for. There are moments when you can almost feel the 2 versions of yourself fighting for space. The medic who saved lives in the middle of hell, and the woman who now changes Roman 4 lines under fluorescent lights. Both of them living in the same body, neither one at peace. When I reached my car, I looked back once. Through the window, I saw Hayes still watching. And in that gaze, I saw the first ripple of something I hadn't felt in years, the past catching up. I thought I'd buried Widow 6, but ghosts don't stay buried when someone remembers your name. As I drove home, the night felt heavier than usual. The road stretched ahead, endless and quiet. I turned on the radio to fill the silence, but every song sounded like static. Eventually, I turned it off and let the hum of the tires become my only company. You'd think time makes forgetting easier. It doesn't. Time just teaches you to live with the noise inside your head. At home, the apartment was dark except for the kitchen light. I kept it that way. One bulb in a room too big for one person. There were no medals on the walls, no pictures in frames. Just a box in the closet with a patch inside, 2 serpents coiled around a dagger, the insignia of Widow 6. No one else was supposed to have one. They collected them all after Kandahar, but I kept mine, not as a trophy, as a reminder of what not to forget. I sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on my knees, head down. The image of Hayes at the bar replayed again and again. His voice, steady but trembling at the edges, saying they thought you died. Maybe it would have been easier if I had. Outside, a siren wailed and faded. The city moved on, unaware that a piece of its forgotten war had just been unearthed in a bar full of laughter and beer. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the ceiling instead, tracing cracks that looked too much like old maps. Kandahar, Jalalabad, Kabul, places that lived under my skin like scars that refused to close. The next morning at the hospital, everything felt too bright. The smell of antiseptic, the steady beeping of monitors. Soft voices of nurses calling for charts. It was all too clean, too peaceful. The contrast almost hurt. One of the younger nurses, Emily, waved from the station. "Morning, Rebecca. You look like you didn't sleep." I smiled, practiced. "You get used to it." She laughed, not knowing the truth hidden inside those words. In room 212, an old veteran named Hal was waiting for his dressing change. He was missing a leg, but not his sense of humor. "Morning. Doc," he said, grinning, "you look like hell." I told him it was mutual and began to unwrap the bandage. His skin was thin, paper white, the kind that tears if you breathe too hard. He said, "Have you ever missed it?" "Miss what?" "The noise, the chaos, the feeling that you mattered." I didn't answer right away, the room filled with the sound of gauze sliding over skin. Finally, I said, "Every day." Hal nodded, eyes distant. "We all do," when I left his room. I stood for a moment in the hallway, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. The world outside kept spinning, but something inside me had shifted. I could feel it, subtle but certain, like the tremor before an earthquake. Hayes would come back. I knew it before I even admitted it to myself. Men like him don't let go of ghosts once they've seen them. And when he did, everything I'd buried, Kandahar, Widow 6, the truth about why my team never came home, would come with him. Sometimes the past doesn't knock, it just walks right in. If you're still here listening to this, maybe you understand that feeling. The quiet before the storm, the kind of silence that knows your name, because for me, that night at the bar wasn't an accident. It was the beginning of the moment I stopped walking away. By the second night, I could feel the old rhythm coming back, that restless hum beneath the skin that soldiers carry long after the gunfire stops. It's strange how the body can miss chaos, how silence feels heavier than explosions when you've lived through both. At the hospital, my shifts blurred together. Days became nights, and nights became something else entirely. The VA ward is its own kind of battlefield. The smell of bleach, old coffee, and the ghosts of men who left pieces of themselves overseas. You learn to listen differently here, to the tremor in a voice, the pause before a memory. One of my patients, Sergeant Wilson, used to call me Ma'am Medic, said it made him feel safer. He lost his sight in Fallujah, but could still describe the layout of the ward better than most who had eyes. He once told me that sound has shape, that you can hear courage if you know how to listen. I asked him what it sounds like. He said, "Quiet, mostly." That stayed with me. By the end of the week, I convinced myself the bar incident would fade away. Some drunk soldiers, a misunderstanding, a ghost of a name no one believed anymore. Widow 6 was a myth to most, a classified experiment in joint operations that went wrong, wiped off the books before anyone could ask too many questions. But myths have a way of finding the people who lived them. It was Friday evening when I saw him again. Captain Hayes. I was clocking out, tucking my badge into my pocket when I noticed a man sitting in the hospital lobby. Civilian clothes, ball cap pulled low, but the posture gave him away. Soldiers never stop scanning rooms, even when they're pretending not to. He stood when he saw me. "Rebecca Moore, right?" I nodded, already bracing. "I wanted to apologize about the other night," he said. "Rodriguez has more testosterone than judgment." I told him I'd seen worse. He smiled faintly. "I bet you have." Then his face changed, quiet again, the way men look when they're about to ask something that matters. "Was it you, in Kandahar, the medic who dragged my team out under fire?" I didn't answer right away. The lobby was empty except for a janitor mopping near the doors. I could have lied. I almost did. But lies are like landmines, safe until someone steps on them. "Yes," I said, "it was me." He took off his cap, running a hand through his hair. "Jesus, I thought you were gone. They told us everyone in Widow 6 was KIA. Most were," I said. He sat back down like his knees couldn't hold the weight of it. I joined him. We didn't speak for a while, just the sound of the mop and the hum of the soda machine. Finally, he said, "You saved my life." I shook my head. "I saved who I could." He looked at me then, really looked. The kind of look that strips away the surface and sees the person underneath, the exhaustion, the guilt, the years you tried to outlive. "You don't talk like someone who forgave herself." I smiled. But it wasn't the kind that reached my eyes. "You don't either." That made him laugh softly. "Touché." When he spoke again, his voice dropped lower. "I've been trying to track down what happened to Widow 6, but every file I request gets redacted or denied. It's like someone buried the whole thing." "They did," I said, "on purpose." "Why?" "Because we weren't supposed to exist." He frowned. "The official line was that your unit went rogue." I met his eyes. "We didn't go rogue. We refused an order. There's a difference." He didn't ask what the order was. Smart man. Instead, he said, "If you ever feel like talking, I'm at the base annex. We've got a veterans outreach there. Coffee's bad, but the company's good." I told him I'd think about it, knowing I wouldn't. but as he left, something inside me shifted again. It had been years since anyone spoke of Widow Six without bitterness or mockery. He said the name like it still meant something. Like we still mattered. That night, I opened the box in my closet for the first time in years. The patch inside was faded now, the twin serpents almost invisible. I ran my fingers over it, tracing the outline until my eyes blurred. Widow Six wasn't supposed to die like that. We were trained for the impossible deep extraction, battlefield triage under fire, zero visibility rescue. 6 medics, 1 field commander. No insignia, no country tags. Just the mission, save who you can, no matter the flag. We operated between lines, ghosts in a war that didn't want to admit we existed. But then came Kandahar. I don't dream about it often. When I do, the details change, the faces blur, the desert burns brighter. But one thing stays the same, the radio static, the voice giving the wrong coordinates, the scream when the ridge collapsed. That night I didn't sleep again. I sat by the window. The city lights flickering like muzzle flashes in the distance. The ghosts were closer now. The next day I found a folded note in my locker at the hospital. No name, no signature, just 5 words written in block letters. Widow Six deserved better. I froze. The paper smelled faintly of gun oil. I looked around the locker room, empty. The sound of running water in the sinks, my pulse loud enough to drown it. I crumpled the note and shoved it in my pocket. Later, when I stepped outside, Hayes was waiting near the parking lot. He saw the look on my face and knew before I spoke. Someone left you a message, didn't they? I didn't ask how he knew. Soldiers recognize fear when it walks beside them. He said, you should come by the annex. We've got old friends who remember things the files don't. I wanted to say no, but something in his voice, not pity, not curiosity, but that quiet respect only people who have bled for the same reasons understand, made me nod. The annex was a squat building near the docks, more like a storage unit than a place for healing. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee and worn paper. A few vets sat around playing cards. Their laughter was thin but real. Hayes led me to a back room. On the wall hung photos of units long gone: Rangers, SEAL, Marines. In the corner, a small flag folded in glass. He poured 2 coffees and said, I've been collecting names. People who were there when Widow Six went dark. I thought maybe you could fill in the blanks. I stared at the steam rising from my cup. The past always finds a way to warm itself back up. You won't like the blanks I fill, I said. He leaned forward. Try me, so I told him. Not everything, not yet, but enough to make his face go pale. About the wrong coordinates, the missing air support, the silence on comms when we called for extraction. How command blamed us for disobeying a direct order that would have gotten a civilian village wiped out. How I was the one who said no. When I finished, he sat there for a long time. Then he said, you were right. Right doesn't bring anyone back. No, he said, but it keeps the dead honest. The air felt heavier after that. Outside, a ship horn blew deep and mournful. He asked, do you still have your field log? I shook my head. They took everything. He smiled faintly. Not everything, apparently. He nodded at the patch on my wrist. I'd forgotten I was wearing it. The twin serpents had darkened from sweat, but the shape still caught the light. Where'd you get that? He asked. It was a gift. From the first person I couldn't save. He didn't ask more. Good man. As I left the annex, the sky had turned the color of ash, a storm rolling in from the bay. I could smell the rain before it hit, sharp and clean. Funny thing about storms, they always come when you least need them, but somehow right when you deserve them. That night, I found another note under my apartment door, same handwriting. This time it said, you can't hide forever. Widow Six remembers. I sat there on the floor, reading it under the flicker of the hallway light. I should have been afraid, but what I felt instead was something colder. Familiar, anger. It wasn't just a threat, it was a reminder. Someone out there still cared enough to hate us. I folded the note and placed it beside the old patch, the 2 relics of a war that refused to die. The phone rang around midnight. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. A man's voice, distorted, mechanical. Widow Six wasn't a mistake. You were a warning. The line went dead. For a long time, I just sat there, the dial tone humming like a heartbeat. Then I picked up my bag, slipped the patch inside, and looked at my reflection in the dark window. For years, I'd been trying to be Rebecca Moore, nurse, quiet neighbor, harmless ghost. But the truth was staring back at me now, unflinching. Widow Six never ended. It just went underground. When I finally lay down, the city was silent again. Outside, the rain began to fall, steady and patient, washing the streets clean. People think redemption is about peace. It's not. It's about survival. And somewhere out there, someone had just opened a door I thought was sealed for good. If you're listening, if you've ever tried to bury a part of yourself so deep it couldn't find you, you know what comes next. The past never knocks twice. It breaks the lock and walks right in. Sleep never came that night. When dawn finally broke, I was already sitting by the window, watching the light crawl across the floor like it was afraid to touch me. The note still lay on the table, the words fading in and out with the morning sun. Widow 6 remembers. Funny thing about memory, it doesn't ask for permission. It just shows up uninvited, like an old friend who doesn't care that you've moved on. That morning, the past came back not as a ghost, but as a film I couldn't pause. I can still feel the sand of Kandahar under my fingernails. The air there tasted like metal and dust. You could tell what kind of day it would be just by how the horizon shimmered. Back then, I was Sergeant Rebecca Moore, Field Medic, Task Force Widow 6, a name whispered between units and never written down. We were the ones who went where the maps ended. There were 6 of us. Daniels, our commander, Harris and Lee, the techs, Russo. Explosives, Miller, sniper, and skeptic, and me, the medic. We weren't supposed to exist. That was the point. Our mission that week was simple on paper: rescue a group of NGO hostages from a compound outside Kandahar. Intel said there were children among them. Command said it was a clean op, but anyone who's ever been in country knows that clean doesn't belong in war vocabulary. We lifted off at 0200. Night vision cutting through the dark like ghosts. I remember Miller joking that the coffee tasted like jet fuel and Russo betting we'd be home before breakfast. Small talk before chaos, that's how soldiers keep sane. The first half went as planned. We breached, secured, extracted. I still remember the faces, dirt-streaked, terrified, clinging to us like we were angels. Then the radio crackled. New orders: leave the civilians, advance to secondary coordinates. High-value target confirmed. Daniels hesitated. We trained for 1,000 contingencies, but none like this. The hostages were barely breathing, half of them kids. He asked for confirmation. HQ repeated the order: abandon the civilians, pursue the target. I looked at Daniels, he looked at me, and that was it, the longest second of my life. He said more: secure the civilians and hold position. We'll finish this fast, but I knew that tone. The one officers use when they already know they're not coming back. Minutes later, the explosions started, then gunfire, then silence. When the ridge went up, the sky lit like hell's own lantern. I ran toward the noise, dragging the smallest of the kids, a girl no older than 7, under my arm. Amina, I learned later. Her eyes were too big for her face, too calm for a child. I found Daniels first, half buried, whispering through a throat full of blood, his radio beside him still crackling. Command was repeating the same coordinates, the same lie. I pressed my hand over his wound, tried to stop the impossible. He grabbed my wrist and said, "Don't. Just get them out." Then he was gone. The rest of the team followed, one by one. Harris's last words were an apology. Miller's were my name. There's no training manual for what comes after that. By the time I reached the evac zone, there was no evac, no signal, just static. I used what was left of my kit to keep Amina alive. She'd taken a fragment to the leg. I had no blood bags left. So I did the only thing I could: cut the line into my own vein and let her body take what it needed. You can't think about infection or consequences when you're watching a child fade. You just act. When I finally made it back to base, I was half conscious, half dead, and fully expendable. They didn't call me a hero. They called me insubordinate. HQ said I'd disobeyed orders, that I'd abandoned the mission, that Widow 6 was a failed experiment. They scrubbed our records, buried our names, and sealed the report under operational anomaly. The medals went to someone else. The blame went to me. During the inquiry, one colonel looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're lucky we're not charging you for treason." I told him I'd sleep better if they did. After the discharge, I tried to rebuild a life. It's strange how quickly people forget the soldier once the uniform's gone to the world. I was just another woman with a limp and a stare too steady for comfort. I signed up for nursing school under my mother's maiden name. The interviews were awkward. "So, Rebecca, any field experience?" They'd ask. Some, I'd answer. They'd smile politely, unaware that I'd once sewn human flesh back together in the dark with fishing line and morphine fumes. Money was tight. I took odd jobs: grocery clerk, night janitor. I once volunteered to stitch up salmon in a seafood market just to keep my hands from forgetting what precision felt like. The manager thought I was joking. I wasn't. There's a kind of absurd comedy in survival. You lose everything, and the world still expects you to smile in your ID photo. I kept my head down, changed addresses, avoided bases. Every year on the anniversary of Kandahar, I lit a candle for the 5 who didn't make it. Sometimes I thought I heard their voices in the static when I turned on the radio. Maybe that's just guilt's way of saying goodnight. For years, no one mentioned Widow 6 again, until last week, until that note. And then the voice on the phone, "You were a warning." That sentence looped in my mind for days. I didn't know what it meant, but part of me, the part that never stopped being Sergeant Moore, knew it wasn't random. 2 nights later, it came, the message that would tear the past wide open. I was closing up the med bay when my old comms tablet blinked, the same device I'd turned in after discharge. I kept it locked in a drawer out of habit more than hope. It shouldn't have powered on. The battery had been dead for years. The screen flickered once, then steadied. Encrypted message received. Origin, Widow 6 net. My throat went dry. That network was shut down a decade ago. The message was short, 3 lines. Amina captured. Coordinates, Jalalabad. You are the only one who can reach her. I stared at it for a long time. The cursor blinked like a pulse. For a moment, I thought it was a cruel joke. Someone from the base, maybe Hayes, trying to dig into my past. But then I remembered the smell of gun oil on the note. The distorted voice on the phone. Whoever this was, they weren't guessing. Jalalabad, the name tasted of dust and memory. Amina would be 17 now, if she was alive. My hands shook as I shut the device off. For years, I'd told myself she'd made it to the refugee program, that she was somewhere safe, studying, laughing, forgetting. That was the only way I could live with what happened. Now that lie was gone. I didn't sleep that night either. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the edge of the note again and again. Widow 6 remembers. Maybe it wasn't a threat, maybe it was a summons. By morning, I'd made my decision. If Amina was out there, I'd find her. Not because I owed her, but because I owed them. Daniels, Harris, Lee, Miller, Russo. You don't walk away from ghosts, you walk with them. I packed what I had, my old med kit half empty, a worn jacket, the patch before leaving. I wrote a note and taped it to the fridge. If I don't come back, don't look for me. As I locked the door, I caught my reflection in the glass again. I looked older, smaller, but my eyes, they were the same as they'd been in the desert. Focused, unforgiving, the kind of eyes that don't wait for orders anymore. Outside, the sun was rising over Norfolk, gold bleeding into gray. Somewhere halfway across the world, a war I thought had ended was starting again. I started the engine. The radio came alive with static. For a moment, I thought I heard something in it, a voice, a whisper, "Widow 6, come home." And I realized then maybe home wasn't a place after all. Maybe it was a mission you never finished. If you've ever tried to outrun the past, you know this feeling, that sharp pull in your chest when the ghosts finally catch up. It doesn't ask for permission, it just calls your name. And when it does, there's only one thing left to do: answer. I drove until the lights of Norfolk vanished behind me and the ocean wind carried the smell of rust and salt through the cracked window. Each mile on that empty road felt like stepping backward through time. The steering wheel vibrated under my fingers, and every sound reminded me of something I used to know. A hum of an engine could be a helicopter. A gust of wind could be incoming fire. Some habits never die. Hayes picked up on the second ring. His voice was low and cautious. "You sound like someone standing on a cliff," he said. "Maybe I am," I told him. "Regrets do not change coordinates." He paused, that long silence that soldiers share when they know there is no turning back. "Where are you?" he asked. "Heading your way." When I got to the annex, it looked smaller than I remembered. One table, one flickering light. The maps on the wall had faded to the color of old paper. Hayes was already there, leaning over the table, sleeves rolled up, studying something he probably did not want to understand. "You got a message," he said quietly. "I can see it in your eyes." I handed him the tablet. The screen glowed with those 3 lines. He read them, jaw tightening. "Amina, the girl from Kandahar. You remember," I said. "Hard to forget the stories," he answered. "You carried her for miles. We thought it was a rumor. It wasn't." He looked back at the screen, tracing the coordinates with one finger. "Jalalabad. That is no place for anyone right now. You sure this is not bait? I am sure someone wants me to see it." He studied me for a moment, his eyes heavy with that mix of concern and respect that comes from shared ghosts. "You going after her?" he asked. "Yes, Rebecca, you are not military anymore. You would need logistics, cover, extraction." I smiled slightly. "You think I forgot how to improvise?" He did not smile back. "There is one man who might help you," he said. But he is not going to like seeing you. Who? I asked. Sergeant Miller. The name landed like a punch to the chest. He is alive, I asked. Barely. Lives outside Richmond. Drinks more than he sleeps. He was your spotter, wasn't he? I nodded until the ridge fell. Hayes wrote something on a piece of paper and handed it to me. Don't go alone, he said. I left before he could finish. The drive to Richmond was long and quiet. The road curved through pine trees that bent like old soldiers guarding secrets. Fog hung low, and for a while I almost believed I was back there again, halfway around the world before everything went wrong. When I reached the house, I knew it was his before I even saw the number. The porch light flickered weakly, and the yard was littered with empty bottles that caught the dawn like bits of glass shrapnel. When the door finally opened, he stood there, older but not gentler. If you are selling redemption, I am not buying, he said. I am not here to sell. I answered. He squinted, eyes adjusting to the sight of me. More, that you? Hello, Miller. He stepped aside slowly. Guess hell just froze over. Inside smelled like whiskey and dust. The walls were covered with old photographs, the kind that used to mean something. Widow 6 before it vanished, faces smiling into a future that never came. He poured a drink, hands trembling only slightly. Thought you were dead, he said. A lot of people did. You should have stayed that way, maybe. But I need your help, he laughed, a dry, bitter sound from me. I can't even help myself. I set the tablet on the table. The message glowed in the dim light. He leaned forward, frowning. Who the hell is Amina? You remember the civilians we pulled out? She was the little girl. She lived. He frowned deeper. And now she is gone. Jalalabad. He slammed the glass down, whiskey spilling across the table. Christ, Moore, you can't go back there. That place eats people alive. I know, then why? Because she is alive. Because someone wants me to remember her. Because saving her might be the only thing that still matters. For a long time he said nothing. Then he nodded once, almost to himself. The VA still has my gear in storage. What is left of it, that is all I need. The next morning we drove out before sunrise. The air was cold and sharp, the kind of cold that reminds you to keep moving. The clerk at the depot barely looked up when we gave our ID. 2 hours later we walked out with one crate. Inside were a few med packs, a rifle, and a box of old dog tags. Miller picked one up, brushing the dirt away. Daniels, he said quietly, you ever think we could have done more? Every day, we loaded the gear into the trunk. He watched me close the lid, then asked softly, you really think she's alive? I do not know, but I know what happens if I do nothing. The drive back was silent, that kind of silence that soldiers wear like armor. After a while, Miller said, you ever think how strange it is? We used to be the sharp end of the spear. Now we are ghosts with no mission. I smiled faintly. Maybe ghosts get second chances, only in stories, he said. We stopped at a small motel on the side of the highway. Neon sign, peeling paint, rooms that smelled of bleach and cigarette smoke. I sat on the bed, map spread across my knees. Jalalabad glowed on the screen like a scar. Miller sat across from me, cleaning the rifle, the sound of metal and cloth filling the room. You sure about this? He asked again. No, but I am sure about her. That is enough, he said. Outside the rain began, soft at first, then steady. I lay back and listened. The rhythm of it matched the heartbeat in my throat. Miller spoke again, barely above a whisper. I still see them, you know, Daniels, Russo, Harris, every night. So do I said. Guess that is our penance, he answered. By morning the storm had passed. Miller was already dressed, a small duffel by the door. He looked steadier somehow, like the night had given him back a piece of purpose. We have one more stop, he said. Someone who owes us. Who? I asked. He handed me a paper with a single name. Mercer. I stared at it. He is alive, I said. Oh, he is alive, Miller answered. And rich. Runs private contracts out of D.C. now. He is the one who fed us the wrong intel back then. If anyone knows who sent that message, it is him. The drive north felt endless. The closer we got to the city, the more the past pressed in around me. By the time we reached the glass building downtown, my pulse had settled into that steady rhythm soldiers get before everything breaks. We parked 2 blocks away. The lobby guard barely looked up as we signed in under borrowed names. Widow 6 had been erased from every record, but you can't erase the way a soldier walks. Upstairs, the air was too clean, the silence too deliberate. The office door opened before I could knock twice. Mercer sat behind a wide desk, older now, heavier. His smile was the same, cold, calculated. Well, he said, if it isn't the ghost herself. I stepped forward until my shadow crossed his desk. You sent us the wrong coordinates. You killed them. He did not flinch. Collateral, he said. That is what war is. Collateral. I leaned closer. They were my team. He smiled thinly. Consider this your closure. A screen behind him flickered to life. Jalalabad, a girl in a scarf, hands bound, eyes wide with fear. My chest tightened. Amina. He turned toward the screen like a man admiring his own work. She is valuable now, he said. Some debts never die. Where is she? I asked. That depends, he said quietly. How far are you willing to go this time? I met his eyes. Farther than you think. Behind me, Miller loaded a single round, the click echoing like a clock striking midnight. Outside, city lights flashed against the windows, reflecting off the polished floor like tracer fire. For a second, everything went still. The war had found me again, dressed in a suit and tie, pretending it was over. If you have ever stood at the edge of something that could destroy you, you know that moment when fear turns to focus. That was me, right there, in that office, 10 years after Widow 6 died. It was time to finish the mission that never happened. When we left Mercer's office, the city lights were starting to fade behind the fog. Miller walked beside me, his jaw set, his silence heavier than anything I could say. We didn't speak until we reached the car. He opened the door, threw the duffel in, and finally said, "You shouldn't have looked her in the eye." I had to, I answered. He's not bluffing, Rebecca. If Mercer's involved, it means someone bigger wants this buried. Then we dig, I said. He looked at me and shook his head. You always did have a death wish. The road out of D.C. was long and empty. Gray skies hung low over the highway like the world was holding its breath. I could feel the old rhythm creeping back in. The way my heart beat slower, steadier, the way my hands stopped shaking. It scared me how natural it felt. The soldier in me never really left. She just learned how to be quiet. We drove through the night, following the trail of the men who once called themselves Widow 6. Some had disappeared, some had tried to build new lives, most had failed. Our first stop was in West Virginia, a small town carved into the side of a mountain. I found Corporal Harris in a mechanic's shop behind a shuttered diner. He was under a truck when I called his name. He slid out slowly, squinting into the sunlight. For a moment, I thought he didn't recognize me, then his face hardened. I thought I'd seen the last of you, he said. You almost did. He wiped his hands on a rag and laughed without humor. So what's this about? Another ghost from the past asking for penance. A child's been taken, I said. Jalalabad. He froze, the rag falling to the ground. Don't. That word hung there like a warning. I mean it more. You open that door and everything we buried comes crawling back out. Maybe that's the point. He leaned against the truck, arms crossed. You really think anyone will listen to us? We're ghosts, Rebecca. Dead names on a report that doesn't exist. I met his eyes. Then maybe ghosts are exactly what's needed. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he sighed and looked down at the grease-stained floor. I still have my gear, he muttered. Old habits die harder than we think. By the time we left, he'd packed his duffel and locked the shop door. 3 down, I thought, 4 more scattered across the country. Each reunion felt like a wound reopening. They greeted me with suspicion. Some with anger, a few with tears. To them, I was still the medic who didn't follow orders. The one who walked away when the ridge went up in flames. I couldn't blame them for hating me. Sergeant Vega was next. She was living on the Gulf Coast, working as a paramedic. When I showed up at her station, she froze. Rebecca Moore. The name alone made her drop the clipboard. You have some nerve coming here, she said. I didn't come for forgiveness. I came for help. That's not a request I ever thought I'd hear from you. A girl's been taken, I said. I showed her the message. She read it twice, lips moving silently. Amina, she whispered. The one you saved. I nodded. Her eyes softened. You're serious about this? Deadly. She walked away for a moment, then came back holding her paramedic badge. She set it on the counter. Guess it's time to trade one uniform for another, she said. We spent the next few days traveling, gathering the pieces of what once was Widow 6. Each person brought a different kind of brokenness. PTSD, addiction. Divorce, the kind of scars you don't see until you hear the way they breathe. But under all of it, there was still that same rhythm, the pulse of a team that once trusted each other with their lives. The night before we started training again, we sat around a campfire behind an old storage hangar outside Fayetteville. The smell of fuel and wet earth filled the air. Nobody spoke for a while. Then Miller said, "You know what's funny? We were supposed to be legends. Now we're the cautionary tale." Vega laughed quietly. "Speak for yourself. I'm still legendary in 2 counties. The laughter came easy after that, rough but real. It was the kind that feels like oxygen after too many years underwater. When dawn came, we started working. The first drill lasted less than 5 minutes. Harris tripped over a sandbag, Miller's shoulder gave out halfway through, and Viga swore she'd lost a lung. I couldn't help but laugh. The look they gave me could have melted steel. I smiled and said, "Age doesn't make bullets softer." That earned me a few grudging laughs. It felt good to hear them again. Human, alive, training became our ritual. Every morning we ran, every afternoon we worked through tactics that used to be second nature. I watched them move, relearn, adapt. Each mistake turned into a joke. Each small victory became a spark. One afternoon, Viga dropped her rifle mid-drill. It clattered across the dirt, and Miller shouted, "You planning to scare the enemy to death with that?" She rolled her eyes and shot back, "Better than missing him like you did last time." I felt the tension ease with every sarcastic exchange. Humor had always been our armor. At night when they slept, I stayed awake. I would take the old dog tags from my pocket and run my thumb across the names. Daniels, Russo, Carter, each one a story that ended too soon. I'd whisper their names into the dark, like maybe they could hear me, maybe they were still watching. One evening, while we reviewed the maps, Miller noticed something strange about the coordinates Mercer had shown us. They matched an old forward operating base that had been decommissioned years ago. It was a ghost facility, one that never officially existed. The same kind of place where Widow 6 had once trained. The silence that followed was heavy. "You think Mercer's running something out there?" Viga asked. "He's not running it," Miller said. "He's hiding it." We studied the terrain. Tracing the routes on paper, the valleys, the access points, it was familiar and haunting all at once. My chest tightened when I realized what it meant. Mercer hadn't just betrayed us once. He had built an entire empire from our ashes. That night I couldn't sleep. The moon hung low, silver on the treetops. I walked away from the camp and stood by the fence line, the night air cold on my skin. Sometimes I wondered if I should have died on that ridge with the others. Would that have been easier? Maybe, but Amina's face would always pull me back. That tiny hand clutching my sleeve, the blood on her cheek, the way she whispered thank you even though she barely spoke English. Behind me, I heard Miller's footsteps. He stopped beside me, hands in his pockets. "You think we can really do this?" he asked quietly. I looked at him. "Do what?" "Save a girl halfway across the world. Fix a mistake 10 years old." He gave a tired laugh. "I think maybe we can start by trying." He nodded slowly, staring out into the dark. "That's enough for me." Sometimes, when the night got quiet, I could almost hear them, the voices of Widow 6. The laughter, the radio static, the orders shouted over the wind, calling the ghosts. That's what Miller called it. I never corrected him. Maybe that's what we were doing, calling them back one last time so none of it would be forgotten. The next morning, a message arrived on the secure line we had reactivated. The screen flickered with an encrypted file. Harris frowned, working the code. When he cracked it, a single image appeared. A girl blindfolded, the same scarf, the same eyes. Amina. My heart stopped, but there was something else. A watermark on the corner, the logo of a private defense firm, Phoenix Global Security. I had seen that emblem before, years ago, on Mercer's reports. Miller leaned over my shoulder, his voice rough. "He's not just hiding her," he said. "He's using her." Viga's jaw tightened. "For what?" "Leverage," I said. "They know I'll come." Outside, the morning wind lifted the edge of the tent flap, carrying the smell of diesel and dust. I closed my eyes. The ghosts were whispering again. Maybe they were warning me, or maybe they were just waiting. Either way, the mission was alive, and this time it was personal. If you have ever tried to rebuild something broken, you know it takes more than strength. It takes memory. It takes forgiveness. And sometimes it takes facing the ghosts you swore you'd never see again. Morning broke slow and gray over the training field. The air was heavy with mist and the smell of spent shells from the night before. Viga brewed instant coffee over a small burner while Harris sat sharpening his knife with the same focus he once gave to prayer. Miller was at the Jeep, checking the radio again. None of us had really slept. The image of Amina with that blindfold had burned through every dream. I looked around at the faces that used to be family. They were older, rougher, cracked in places you could not see unless you knew what to look for. But there it was again, that quiet resolve that once made us move like one body. The ghosts had answered the call. Harris handed me a mug. "You think she's still alive?" "I don't think," I said. "I believe. Belief keeps you breathing when logic says stop." He nodded and took a sip. "Then let's move before logic catches up." By mid-morning, we had tracked down what little we could find about Phoenix Global Security. The company looked clean on paper. Contracted aid logistics, reconstruction, medical evacuations, the kind of language that sounds like mercy but smells like money. Its headquarters were registered in Delaware, its operations spread across 3 continents, but the coordinates Mercer showed us pointed to one site, Jalalabad, the ghost facility. Viga spread the maps across the hood of the Jeep. You realize what this means, she said. He never stopped. Widow 6 wasn't a casualty of bad intel. It was a test run. Miller exhaled slowly. You're saying he used us. She looked up at him. I'm saying we were the prototype. The words hit like a gut punch. For a long time, no one spoke. Then I said quietly, if he's running operations there, Amina isn't a prisoner. She's leverage. They'll use her to bait whoever still carries the Widow 6 frequency. That's me. Miller kicked at the dirt. Then we better make sure they regret sending that message. We started prepping the gear. Old weapons, mismatched armor, a few drones Viga had patched together from spare parts. It wasn't much, but we'd learned long ago that precision beats power. As I packed the med kits, my hands paused on a roll of gauze. Memory flashed sharp and quick. The same brand I'd used in Kandahar, the same pattern of blood on my gloves. I took a breath and shoved it deep into the pack. That afternoon, we drove to a small airfield owned by an old contact. Hayes was waiting there, leaning against a fuel drum, cigarette hanging from his mouth. He looked at the 4 of us and smiled in disbelief. I heard rumors, he said. Didn't believe them. Guess I should have. We need a plane, I told him, not asking for free. You never did. He flicked the cigarette away. What's the op? When I told him, the color drained from his face. Jalalabad. He looked down at the tarmac like it might offer another option. You realize what that place is now. Mercer's private sandbox. Nobody gets in without his blessing. Then we won't ask for it. He stared at me for a long moment. You still carry the same eyes, he said finally. The ones that make people follow you even when they shouldn't. He handed me a set of keys. Take her. Old bird, but she'll fly. Just promise me one thing. Bring them home this time. We loaded the gear and climbed aboard. The engines coughed to life, shaking the dust from the wings. As we lifted off, the coastline fell away beneath us, replaced by the endless blue of the Atlantic. Miller sat by the window, staring at the horizon. He whispered something I almost didn't hear. Never thought I'd see the other side of that ocean again. You might not, Harris said dryly. Miller smiled. Then let's make it count. The flight was long and silent, each of us locked inside our own thoughts. I thought of Amina, of her small hand clutching mine in that burning compound years ago. I thought of the promise I'd made to a dying child's mother. I'll keep her safe. Now that promise felt like a wound that never closed. We landed at a remote strip outside Kabul, then moved by truck through back roads. The closer we got, the more the landscape felt like memory. Dust devils twisting in the heat, distant mountains like broken teeth. Every sound made me flinch. The war might have ended on paper, but here it was still breathing. At dusk, we reached a ridge overlooking the compound. Through the binoculars, I saw it clearly. Tall fences, floodlights, guard towers, and on one wall, the faint emblem of Phoenix Global. Viga whistled low. He built himself a fortress. Inside the main building, a convoy of vehicles waited. Men in tactical gear moved like shadows. Then near the center courtyard, I saw her. Amina, older now, maybe 17, thinner, but still her. She was kneeling beside a crate. 2 guards watching. My chest tightened until I couldn't breathe. Miller saw it too. You sure? He whispered. I nodded. That's her. We retreated behind the ridge to plan. The layout was tight, security thick. Viga pointed to a drainage tunnel that led under the east wall. That's our way in. Harris frowned. That tunnel's probably sealed. Then we unseal it, she said. Miller chuckled. I missed your optimism. We waited until night. The moon hid behind clouds, the air heavy with static. As we moved down the ravine, I could feel the ghosts walking beside us. Widow 6 back in the field again. Only this time, no uniforms, no orders, no backup, just purpose. The tunnel was half collapsed, the stench of earth and rust filling the air. Harris led the way, cutting through the debris with a small torch. It took nearly an hour to reach the inner gate. When we emerged, the compound loomed above us, floodlights sweeping the yard. Viga checked her watch. 2 minutes between rotations. We move on 3. We sprinted through the shadows, ducking behind crates, moving in sync like old muscle memory. At the central building, we found a side door unlocked. Inside, the hallways smelled of oil and gunmetal. Screens lined the walls, showing live feeds of the perimeter. Mercer's face appeared on one monitor, speaking to someone off-screen. He was here. We moved quietly, floor by floor, until we reached the lower level. There, in a storage room lit by a single bulb, we found Amina. She looked up, startled, fear flickering into recognition. Her lips parted, but no sound came. I knelt beside her, cutting the zip ties on her wrists. She whispered my name like a prayer, Rebecca. I wanted to tell her everything was fine, but the lie caught in my throat. We need to move, I said. Can you walk? She nodded. Then a voice cut through the silence. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Mercer stood in the doorway, pistol in hand, calm as ever. Behind him, 2 armed men. I pulled Amina behind me. He smiled. You just couldn't stay dead, could you? You sent that message, I said. You wanted me here, he shrugged. I wanted closure. Miller raised his weapon. Closure looks a lot like kidnapping. Mercer laughed softly. You think she's a hostage. She's my insurance. Against what? He tilted his head. Against ghosts like you. He stepped forward, weapon steady. You never understood the bigger picture. Widow 6 was never about rescue. It was about selection. We find the ones willing to disobey, to think for themselves, and then we break them. I felt Amina trembling behind me. Why her? I asked. Because she remembers, Mercer said. She remembers what you did. She remembers the truth. Viga's voice cut through. And what truth is that? Mercer smiled. That your medic wasn't a hero. She was the reason her team died. The words hit harder than the gunfire that followed. Miller fired first, glass shattering, lights flashing red. The room erupted into chaos. I dragged Amina toward the exit while bullets tore through the walls. Harris covered our flank, shouting something I couldn't hear over the alarms. We reached the stairwell, smoke filling the air. Viga was right behind us when a grenade rolled across the floor. She threw herself toward it, kicking it back through the doorway just before it detonated. The blast knocked us down. My ears rang, vision blurred. When the smoke cleared, she was gone. We stumbled outside into the open yard. Sirens blared, guards shouting. The night was fire and steel. Miller grabbed my arm, pointing toward the fence. Go, I'll cover. Don't be stupid, I said. He smiled. That old reckless grin, too late for that. I pulled Amina through the breach as gunfire echoed behind us. We ran into the darkness, hearts pounding. When we reached the ridge, I turned back. The compound burned. Somewhere in that inferno, Mercer was still alive. I could feel it. Amina collapsed beside me, gasping for breath. I wrapped a blanket around her and held her close. You're safe now, I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew the truth. Nothing about this was over. She looked up at me, eyes shining through the smoke. Why did you come back for me? Because you're the only thing I ever did right, I said. She shook her head. No, you came back because you're not done fighting. I smiled faintly. Maybe she was right. Behind us, the flames reached the sky, lighting the desert like dawn. The ghosts were awake again, and the war I thought I'd buried had just begun. If you've ever carried guilt so heavy it bends your bones, you know there's no outrunning it. You can only walk straight into the fire and hope it burns clean. That's what we were doing now, walking back into the flames. When dawn came, it painted the Afghan desert in a bruised shade of gold. Smoke from the compound still climbed into the pale sky, twisting like a ghost that refused to leave. We had escaped, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like unfinished business. Miller was gone. Viga was gone. Harris had taken a bullet through the shoulder. Amina was alive, trembling, half-conscious in the back of the Jeep. I kept driving. The road wound through sand and silence until the radio static faded into the hum of the engine. We stopped near an abandoned village at the foot of a mountain ridge. Crumbling mud walls, empty wells, a single tree clawing at the sky. It was quiet enough to hear your own heart. I checked Amina's pulse, stronger than before. She'd make it through the night. Harris wrapped her arm, grimacing. You think Mercer's still alive? She asked. I didn't answer. Some people don't die easy. We set up camp inside a half-collapsed house. I gave Harris antibiotics and stitched her wound under a flickering lantern. The smell of gunpowder and blood clung to everything. When it was over, I sat outside staring at the horizon. My hands were shaking. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only exhaustion and grief. The desert stretched endless before me, same as it had 10 years ago. The ghosts hadn't left. They just changed their names. Amina woke near midnight. Her eyes were wide, haunted. She whispered, I saw him. Mercer, I nodded. He's the one who hurt you. Her voice trembled. He said you'd come. He said you'd always come. I didn't know what to say. There are lies that sound like promises and promises that turn into ghosts. She looked at me for a long moment. Are you going back for him? I smiled faintly. No, he'll come for us. The next morning, Viga's drone footage started circulating online. Someone had leaked it to expose Phoenix Global. Civilian journalists were calling it a massacre. Washington denied involvement. Contractors vanished, but Mercer was too proud to run. He'd clean up the mess himself. We moved again at sunset, traveling light. I could feel the team shrinking, yet somehow stronger. There's a strange purity in loss. When there's nothing left to lose, fear dies first. Hayes met us near the border. He tracked our location through the old Widow 6 frequency. He looked at Amina and shook his head. I don't know how you keep surviving this. She smiled faintly. I have good teachers. He brought supplies, weapons, and an unmarked truck. There's chatter, he said. Mercer's regrouped. He's got a private unit setting up extraction near the Khyber Pass. He's not running from you, he's drawing you out. I looked at the map spread across the hood. The pass was a maze of canyons and narrow ridges, perfect terrain for an ambush, perfect place to end it. I could almost hear Mercer's voice, calm and condescending. You never learned when to quit. Harris spat into the dust. Then let's not disappoint him. We planned through the night. Harris and Hayes would take the northern ridge, providing overwatch. I'd move with Amina through the canyon, using the old trails to flank his convoy. It was reckless, maybe suicidal, but it was the only way. At dawn, the world turned copper and dust again. The truck rattled down the road, Amina beside me, silent but steady. She tied her hair back, her hands tight on the pack that carried her old medical kit. You don't have to come, I said. She looked straight ahead. You didn't have to come for me either. We left the truck behind and hiked the last mile on foot. The air thinned as we climbed. I could see the convoy below, 4 armored vehicles, mercenaries in desert camo, the Phoenix insignia freshly painted over. Mercer stood near the front, talking into a headset. Even from this distance, I recognized the way he moved, precise, controlled, like a man who still believed he was untouchable. Harris's voice crackled in my earpiece. We have eyes, 2 snipers on the roof to your left, one near the trucks. I acknowledged. Copy, wait for my mark. We crawled closer, using the rocks for cover. The ground burned through my gloves, sweat stung my eyes. Every sound felt amplified, the click of a safety, the rattle of a stone. Amina followed quietly, her breath steady. For someone who'd seen so much fear, she carried herself with grace. When we reached the final ridge, I spotted a small outpost near the gate. A radio antenna blinked red. If Mercer made contact with his team abroad, we'd lose him for good. I signaled Amina, cut the comms. She nodded and moved with surprising speed. She reached the outpost, disabled the first guard with a quick jab to the throat, then yanked the cables free. Static filled the air. For a moment, silence followed. Then Mercer turned, his gaze lifting toward our ridge as if he could smell memory itself. He smiled. That's when everything erupted. Gunfire cracked across the canyon. Harris's rifle barked from above. Hayes launched smoke grenades, covering our descent. We moved like lightning, taking cover behind rusted containers. Bullets tore through metal, sparks flying. I sprinted toward the lead truck. Mercer ducked behind it, firing with precision. A round grazed my shoulder, spinning me sideways. Pain flashed white, but I kept moving. Years of training override instinct. You move until you can't. Amina pulled me into cover, her hands slick with blood that wasn't hers. She tore open the med kit. You're hit. Not bad, I lied. You sound like me, she said, smiling through tears. Harris's voice came through again. They're flanking left. We're low on rounds. I scanned the field. Mercer was advancing, covered by 2 men. His movements were calm, methodical, the same rhythm he'd drilled into us years ago. He shouted over the chaos, Rebecca, it doesn't have to end like this. Come out and we can talk. I laughed under my breath. Talk. That word had lost meaning long ago. Amina's hands trembled as she reloaded her pistol. She looked at me. If we don't make it, don't say that. She met my eyes, then promise me something. If you see him, don't let anger decide. Her words cut through the noise. The same thing I'd once told her mother. Don't let anger decide who you become. The circle was closing. We moved again, inching closer through the smoke. Every breath tasted like iron. The trucks burned. The air thick with fuel and dust. When I finally saw Mercer clearly, he looked older but untouched by remorse. The kind of man who sleeps just fine after war. He stepped out from behind the wreckage, pistol raised. We locked eyes. He smiled faintly. I thought I'd lost you back there. You should have stayed dead. I raised my weapon. You trained me too well for that. His gun barked first. The shot missed by inches, grazing the rock near my head. I rolled, returned fire. One of his men went down. The other ducked behind cover. The fight shrank to silence and echoes, just 2 people in a desert full of ghosts. He spoke again, voice calm even now. You think you're saving her. You're just repeating the same mistake. Mercy doesn't survive war. I stepped out from behind the boulder. Maybe not, but it's the only thing worth surviving for. He fired again. I dove, felt the wind of the bullet pass my ear. My last magazine clattered empty. Then, from the ridge above, Harris's final round found its mark. The bullet struck Mercer's hand, the pistol flying free. He dropped to his knees, blood soaking his sleeve. I walked toward him slowly. Around us, the smoke began to clear. Amina appeared behind me, breathing hard, eyes wide. Mercer looked up, smiling through the pain. You think this ends with me? You can't kill an idea. Widow 6 died years ago because it needed to. It was mercy that killed your team. I lowered my gun, maybe, but this time mercy's what keeps me from finishing you. He blinked, surprised. You won't do it. You never could. He was right. Killing him would have been justice that felt like vengeance. And vengeance never heals anything. Before I could speak, an explosion tore through the field. One of the trucks had gone up, flames consuming everything. The shockwave threw us to the ground. I heard Amina scream. When the dust settled, Mercer was gone. Only fire and shadows remained. I looked around, dizzy, disoriented. Amina was beside me, coughing, tears streaking her face. You're bleeding again, she said. I laughed weakly. That makes two of us. The sky darkened above us, ash drifting like snow. The sound of helicopters echoed in the distance. Maybe rescue, maybe another threat. It didn't matter. We'd done what we came to do. I leaned back against the wreckage, closing my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. The ghosts were quiet. Amina squeezed my hand. What now? I opened my eyes and looked at her. The girl I'd once carried out of a burning house, now standing tall beside me. Now, I said softly, we go home. If you've ever stood in the ruins of what tried to destroy you and felt your heart still beating, you know what homecoming really means. It isn't a place, it's a decision to keep living. We waited for the helicopters to come, but they never did. Only the wind arrived, carrying the smell of burning metal and cordite across the canyon. The sun had started to rise, pale and distant, and for a brief moment the desert almost looked calm. Harris had gone silent over the radio. Hayes was still up on the ridge, calling for a signal that never answered. I held Amina's hand while she pressed bandages to my shoulder. The bleeding had slowed, but my vision was starting to blur at the edges. Stay awake, she said. Her voice was steady, calm in the way people sound when they're terrified. I smiled faintly. You sound like a medic. She met my eyes. You taught me. We moved out of the blast zone, climbing the rocky slope toward a cluster of caves. It wasn't much, but it was covered. From up there, we could see the wreckage spread across the valley like broken bones, and through the smoke, I saw movement. A shadow limping through the debris. My heart clenched. Mercer wasn't dead. He stumbled forward, one arm hanging useless, the other gripping a rifle. The fire behind him painted his figure in red light. He was coming straight for us. I told Amina to get higher ground. She shook her head. No, I'm not leaving you. He called out as he climbed, voice ragged but still proud. You never learned, Rebecca. Mercy only creates more war. I rose slowly, gun trembling in my hand. And what do you call this? Justice? He laughed, a dry sound that turned into a cough. Justice doesn't exist, only orders and obedience. You broke both. He took another step, and the barrel of his rifle lifted toward Amina. Instinct overrode pain. I fired first. The bullet hit his thigh, and he dropped to one knee, still grinning through the blood. There she is, he rasped. Widow 6. For a second, the air went still. Then the ridge above us cracked with gunfire. Hayes had spotted him and fired a warning shot, but Mercer ducked behind a rock. The bullet struck a stone, sparking. I crawled forward, every breath tearing my chest apart. Amina moved beside me, her small frame tense but determined. You can't fight him alone. I'm not alone. It wasn't bravado, it was truth. Widow 6 wasn't a unit anymore, but it lived in every scar, in every decision to keep going. Mercer shifted again, calling out between shots. You could have been anything, command, intelligence. You threw it all away for what? A child? I steadied my aim. For a soul. The silence that followed was louder than the gunfire. Then, in the space of a breath, Mercer lunged from cover, firing wildly. The first bullet hit the rock near my face, the second tore through my side. The pain was white-hot, numbing and heavy at the same time. I fell, the weapon slipping from my grasp. Amina screamed my name and ran toward me. I tried to shout for her to stop, but the sound never left my throat. Mercer turned his gun toward her. His arm shook from blood loss. But his aim was steady enough to kill. And then something in her eyes changed. She didn't look scared anymore. She looked like every soldier I'd ever known who'd had enough. She picked up my sidearm and aimed it straight at him. For a long second, no one breathed. Mercer's mouth twisted into a smile. Go ahead, he said. Show her what she taught you. Amina's finger tightened on the trigger. I forced myself up, gasping, and reached for her hand. My voice was barely more than a whisper. Don't, she blinked, tears cutting through the dust on her face. He'll kill us. No, not if we don't let him. I put my hand over hers, lowering the gun. Don't start your life with death. Mercer stared at us, disbelief flickering across his face. Then slowly his knees gave out. He dropped the rifle, hands shaking. The blood loss had caught up to him. He slumped against the rock, eyes dull, the arrogance gone, for the first time. He looked human. He tried to speak, but no sound came, only a faint breath. Maybe it was an apology, maybe it was pride. Then his eyes rolled back and he was gone. Amina fell beside me, sobbing, the gun slipping from her fingers. I pulled her close. It's over, I whispered, but the words didn't feel true. It's never really over. You just learn to live with what's left. By the time Hayes and Harris reached us, the sun was high. They looked exhausted, hollow-eyed. But alive. Harris helped me sit up, cursing under her breath when she saw the wound. Hayes looked at Mercer's body and said quietly, he was the reason, wasn't he? The ambush, the lie. I nodded, all of it. He crouched down beside me. You didn't have to come back here. I did to end it. He glanced at Amina, who was now sitting near the edge of the ridge, staring at the sky. You think she'll ever forgive this world? I watched her for a long moment. Maybe. If we teach her how. We wrapped up what we could, burned the rest. Widow Six would not leave evidence behind. Not this time. Before we left, I took off my insignia bracelet, the one with the twin serpents, and placed it beside Mercer's body. Let the past bury itself. The extraction was rough. The helicopter came at dusk, rattling the cliffs, blowing dust in every direction. We climbed aboard, silent, each lost in our own memories. Harris held pressure on my wound while Hayes kept watch through the open door. Amina sat across from me, her gaze distant, lips pressed tight. I could tell she was already somewhere else, in a place where pain hadn't yet turned into purpose. When we landed at the base hospital, medics rushed us inside. I remember the cold metal of the stretcher, the blur of fluorescent lights above me, and Amina's hand slipping out of mine. Someone said my pulse was dropping. Someone else shouted for more saline. Then everything went dark. I woke days later, surrounded by the slow hum of machines. My body ached in every place I could still feel. Amina was sitting by the bed, wearing hospital scrubs that were too big for her. Her hair was tied back, her face drawn but calm. When she saw me open my eyes, she smiled. You made it, did we? She nodded. Harris and Hayes flew back last night. Phoenix Global's under investigation. They won't bury it this time. I tried to sit up but couldn't. And Mercer, she hesitated, gone. They're calling it a field accident. A small, bitter laugh escaped me. That's one way to describe justice. We stayed quiet for a while, then she said softly, you were right, mercy matters. I looked at her, the girl who'd once been a child hiding under rubble. You gave it meaning. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the bracelet I'd left behind. They found this. She placed it in my hand. You should keep it. I shook my head. No, you should. Widow Six needs a heartbeat. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. She slipped it onto her wrist, the twin serpents glinting under the hospital light. For the first time, the symbol didn't look like a mark of war. It looked like continuity. The nurse came in, checking my vitals, and said something about rest, but I couldn't sleep. My mind wandered through every moment that had led here. The friends gone, the promises broken, the ghosts finally quiet. Maybe this was what coming home really meant. Not the parades or medals, but the small peace you find when the fight inside you finally lays down its weapon. That night, I asked Amina to read the names of my team. She did, one by one, her voice soft but unwavering. Harris, Vega, Miller, Parker, each name a breath, each breath a prayer. When she finished, she whispered, rest now. I closed my eyes. The hum of machines faded into the sound of waves somewhere far away, the memory of a beach we never reached. I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or remembering. It didn't matter. Both felt like forgiveness. If you've ever carried guilt so heavy it shaped your spine, you'll know that healing isn't erasing the past. It's learning to stand up straight with it still on your back. Some stories end in silence, some end in a heartbeat. This one ends with both. The doctors said she might never wake up. That was the phrase they used, clean and clinical, like reading a weather report, stable but unresponsive. They said it with soft voices, as if whispering could somehow make the truth kinder. Rebecca lay in a private room at Walter Reed, surrounded by machines that breathed and blinked for her. The sterile light made her skin look almost translucent. The The scars on her shoulder had faded to pale ribbons, but the one behind her eyes, the one no scan could capture, stayed alive. Every week Amina came. Sometimes she brought flowers, sometimes a book she pretended to read aloud. Mostly she just sat and talked, about medical school, about the noise of the city, about how she was learning to sleep again without dreaming of sand and gunfire. The nurses said she came even when the weather was bad, even when the roads were flooded. They said she sat there for hours, her voice low and steady, as if holding vigil for a promise no one else remembered. Once she leaned close to Rebecca's still face and whispered, "You saved me twice, once in the desert and once by showing me mercy." She smiled sadly. "Now I have to learn how to live up to that." Outside, life went on. People drove to work, complained about traffic, planned vacations. Inside that room, time slowed. The monitors hummed in rhythm with a heart that refused to quit. Hayes visited too. Though less often, war had a way of scattering people. He'd retired early, took a job training medics, said it was the only thing that still made sense. Every time he came, he brought something small, a patch, a photo, a letter from an old unit member. He'd stand by her bed and tell her things she'd probably never hear. "Widow 6 is still alive, you know," he said one morning. "Harris started volunteering at the VA. Miller's sober now, says you're the reason he tried again." He cleared his throat, eyes flicking toward the ceiling. "We're all just trying to make the pieces fit." He didn't know Amina was standing in the doorway listening. When he left, she moved to Rebecca's side and touched her hand. "They're finding their way back," she said softly, "because you showed them it was still possible." Weeks turned into months. The seasons changed outside her window. Snow gave way to rain, rain to sunlight. One day, a nurse noticed Rebecca's fingers twitch. It was barely a movement, like the flutter of a leaf. They called in a doctor who watched the monitor and said it might be a reflex. Amina didn't believe that. She leaned forward, heart pounding, and whispered, "If you can hear me, it's okay to come back. We still need you." The monitor beeped steady and sure, but her eyes stayed closed. That night, Amina stayed longer than usual. She told Rebecca about her final exams, about the children she wanted to work with someday. She laughed softly. "You'd hate the cafeteria food here." She said, "It's worse than the field rations." Then her voice cracked. "You'd probably tell me to toughen up." She reached for the bracelet on her wrist, the twin serpents of Widow 6, and turned it between her fingers. "I'm trying, Rebecca. I really am." Somewhere deep inside the silence, maybe something shifted, maybe not. The machines kept humming, as faithful as sentinels. A few months later, Hayes organized a memorial, not a funeral. Because there was still breath in her chest, but something quieter, a remembrance. They called it Operation Homecoming. Veterans, medics, nurses, even a few civilians came. They filled the small hall with candles and photographs. Someone brought an American flag that had flown in Kandahar. Amina stood at the back, hands clasped, listening as Hayes spoke. She never wanted medals, he said. She just wanted people to live. That was her whole mission. He played a recording they had found on Rebecca's old field drive. Her voice, soft but clear, filled the room. "If I don't make it back," she said, "tell them I have no regrets. There are wars you win by fighting and wars you win by refusing to fight anymore." No one moved for a long time. You could feel the weight of her words hanging over everyone there. It wasn't just grief, it was understanding. Afterward, Amina stepped outside into the cool evening air. The city lights reflected off the Potomac, turning the water into silver glass. She stood there, holding the bracelet, and whispered, "I'll finish what you started." When she turned, she saw Hayes behind her. He handed her a small envelope. "We found this among her things. Looks like a letter she never sent." Amina took it, unfolded the paper carefully. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, written in pencil. It read, "If you are reading this, it means I couldn't say it in person. I'm not a hero. I was just tired of watching good people disappear. If I taught you anything, let it be this. Saving a life is never a small act. It's a rebellion against despair. Be patient with the world even when it doesn't deserve it. Love is not weakness. It's the hardest thing we do." Signed, Rebecca Moore. Amina read it twice, then folded it back. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Grief had already carved its place in her, but now it was lined with purpose. A year later, Rebecca's name was quietly added to the roll of fallen medics. No ceremony, no speeches. Just a line on a wall and a flag folded in a box. But in the VA hospital where she had worked, they kept her locker untouched. Inside it was a stethoscope, a photo of her unit, and a small note taped to the door. It said, "Widow 6 until the mission ends." Amina saw it once when she came to speak at a graduation ceremony for new combat medics. She touched the note, smiled, and whispered, "It never ends, does it?" Then she looked up at the group of new recruits staring at her. Most of them were barely 20, their faces a mix of pride and fear. She began to tell them the story, not the classified parts, not the heroics, but the truth, the nights of silence, the mercy that changed everything, the courage it takes to forgive. When she finished, no one clapped. They just stood there, eyes bright, shoulders straighter. That was enough. Later, walking out into the sunlight, Amina felt the bracelet warm against her skin. She remembered Rebecca's voice saying, "Mercy isn't surrender, it's strength in its purest form." And for the first time in years, she believed it. If you've ever lost someone who carried the best parts of you, you'll understand this. Sometimes they don't really leave. They just live differently through the choices you make, the lives you save, and the hope you refuse to let die. Years passed quietly after the memorial. The war stories faded from headlines, the world found new conflicts to care about, and yet for those who'd lived through it, time never moved in a straight line. It looped, circled, replayed. Every scar had an echo. Every silence carried the sound of someone missing. Amina finished medical school with honors. She specialized in trauma medicine like Rebecca once had during residency. She worked long nights in emergency rooms where chaos and compassion shared the same space. There were moments when the smell of antiseptic mixed with blood would pull her back to that valley in Afghanistan, the flash of a light, the tremor of an explosion. But she learned to breathe through it, to steady her hands, to focus on the living. One morning after a long shift, she stopped by the veterans' ward to check on an older patient who refused pain medication. He told her he'd been in the Marines years before she was born. "You remind me of someone," he said. "There was a medic who patched me up in Kandahar once. Tough woman, quiet, don't remember her name, but she had this look in her eyes like she'd seen the end of the world and kept walking anyway." Amina smiled, though her chest tightened. "I think I know who you mean." She didn't tell him that the woman he remembered was buried only in paperwork, not in soil. That somewhere in the system, Rebecca Moore existed as both a ghost and a secret. The truth didn't need a name to survive. It lived in every life she'd touched. Outside the ward, Amina passed the memorial wall. She traced the engraved letters with her fingers. So many names, so much unfinished love. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the polished surface, and for a moment she thought she saw Rebecca's face behind her, faint and soft like a memory catching the light. That evening, she visited Walter Reed again. The room where Rebecca had once lain was empty now, converted into an office. A framed photograph hung on the wall, showing a woman in desert fatigues with calm eyes and a half smile. No caption, no dates, just presence. Amina stood there, watching the photo until the light outside turned golden. She whispered, "You came home after all." She walked outside into the courtyard where cherry blossoms had started to bloom. Spring in D.C. always carried a hint of contradiction, beauty that grew out of loss. A nurse passing by stopped to greet her. "Your doctor, Rahimi, right? The one who served overseas." Amina hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but I wasn't a soldier, not really." The nurse smiled. "Doesn't matter, you carry yourself like one." Later that night, Amina sat in her small apartment overlooking the city. On the table beside her was the bracelet, the twin serpent still gleaming though the metal had dulled with time. She turned it in her hand and thought of the words Rebecca had once said in the middle of the desert. "Don't start your life with a death." She opened her laptop, clicked through files, and found the old recording Hayes had played at the memorial. Rebecca's voice filled the room again, faint but steady. "If I don't come back, tell them I don't regret anything. Some wars aren't meant to be won, they're meant to be survived." Amina closed her eyes, letting the sound settle around her like warmth. Then she began to type. The article she wrote wasn't about the mission or the conspiracy or even the loss. It was about mercy. About what it costs to choose compassion in a world built on violence. About the kind of courage that never makes the news. She titled it "The Nurse Who Never Came Home." It went viral overnight. Veterans shared it across networks, nurses posted it on bulletin boards, families of fallen soldiers printed copies and read them at kitchen tables. No one knew who the story was about. That was the point. Weeks later, she received a letter from a girl in Oklahoma. It said, "My dad served in Kandahar. He never talked about it, but after reading your story, he told me he remembered a medic who saved his friend. He cried for the first time in 20 years. Thank you." Amina folded the letter and placed it beside the bracelet. Some things didn't need monuments, they just needed witnesses. As the years passed, she kept her promise. She joined humanitarian missions, worked in war zones and refugee camps, and trained young medics to heal first and question later. Everywhere she went, she carried Rebecca's lesson like a quiet prayer: mercy before might, healing before harm. On the 10th anniversary of Widow 6, she was invited to speak at the dedication of a new military hospital wing. The auditorium was filled with veterans, doctors, and students. She stepped to the podium, wearing her white coat and the bracelet on her wrist. The lights dimmed, and for a heartbeat. The silence was complete. She began softly. There was a woman who once told me that real strength isn't about how many enemies you defeat, but how many lives you choose to save instead. She wasn't famous. She never made the news, but her kindness outlasted every battle she ever fought. She looked up, her eyes sweeping the crowd. Her name was Rebecca Moore, Widow 6. A murmur moved through the audience. Some recognized the name from whispers, others simply listened. She taught me that healing is a form of resistance. Amina said that forgiveness can be braver than vengeance, and that even when the war ends, our duty doesn't. It continues in every act of care, in every wound we close, in every choice to love despite what we've lost. The room was still. Then one by one, people began to rise. No clapping, just standing, quiet respect for someone who had never asked for any. After the ceremony, a young soldier approached her. He couldn't have been more than 20. He said, "Ma'am, do you really think it's possible to forgive after everything?" Amina thought of Rebecca lying in that hospital bed, of the letter written in pencil, of the promise that had outlived the war. "Yes," she said, "because someone once did it for me." That night she walked along the river where the lights of Washington shimmered on the water. She held the bracelet up to the moonlight and whispered, "Widow 6 is not a name, it's a promise to heal what war destroys." A breeze carried her words away, scattering them across the dark water. Somewhere, maybe far beyond the reach of time or memory, Rebecca heard, or maybe she didn't need to. The promise had already been kept. If you've listened this far, maybe you understand now. Heroes aren't the ones who fight until the end. They're the ones who choose to lay their weapons down and keep their hearts open. That's how wars really end, not with surrender, with grace. And if you believe that mercy still has a place in this world, join us. Like and subscribe to Military Revenge, where we honor those who fought not for glory, but for peace. Because every story, like every scar, deserves to be seen for what it truly is, a testament to survival and to love. I used to think strength was about how long you could keep fighting, how much pain you could take before you finally broke. But life has a way of teaching you softer lessons. It shows you that the bravest thing sometimes is to stop fighting, to lay down the weight, and to choose compassion when the world tells you to harden. Rebecca Moore never got a medal, no folded flag, no parade. Her name isn't carved in marble. But her story lives in every person who still believes that kindness is stronger than fear. She taught me that mercy can survive even after the war ends, and that sometimes the truest act of courage is to forgive yourself for surviving. When I look back now, I don't see a battlefield. I see a woman who refused to let hate define her, who carried both her guilt and her grace with the same steady hands. And in that quiet defiance, she became something larger than a soldier. She became hope. In a world that glorifies victory, she chose humanity. And in doing so, she reminded us that strength is not measured by how many lives you take, but by how many hearts you heal. If you believe that compassion is also a form of bravery, that forgiveness is its own kind of victory, then you understand what this story was really about. Like, subscribe and stay with Military Revenge, where we honor those who fought not for power, but for peace. Because sometimes the greatest battles are the ones we fight to stay kind.